Okay, so hopefully you've linked it back into physical activity. So we know what the risks are. We've already established that fundamental movement skills, the better, the more competent young children are, the more likely they are to have good physical activity, and the more likely they are to stay involved in physical activity for the lifelong. If they've got poor fundamental movement skills, they're likely to have poor physical activity. They're not likely to engage in lifelong physical fitness, and hence they will develop some of these consequences. So they will become obese. Why? Because they're not physically active. They will develop mental and health problems such as heart disease and diabetes and cancer, because there's good evidence that physical activity is linked to those hyperkinetic diseases. So hyperkinetic is a lack of movement, a lack of physical activity. And you can see that what we talk about, the compounding impact of physical inactivity. And you can see that there's that sort of spiral, isn't there? That as you become less physically active, you become more sedentary. You live a life where you don't go out and exercise. You sit in the chair in the evenings. You don't go out and move. And as a consequence of that, there's this sort of negative spiral that people go into. And it's the same for young children. They go to secondary school, they've got poor movement skills. They have bad experiences of PE, they have bad experiences of sport, they get bullied about it, they get called names. So they don't engage, and they don't engage throughout their school years. Hence, when they leave school, they haven't got that history of being active, so they don't be active, and hence it just goes into that downward spiral. So we know there's excellent evidence out there to suggest that young children should be doing 60 minutes of physical activity a day, and it's our jobs as PE teachers, as sports coaches, to try and get them active. Now, it doesn't have to be 60 minutes in one go. It could be 10 blocks of 6 minutes. It could be 5 blocks of 12 minutes. It could be 4 blocks of 15 minutes. And within that, we need to try and get them doing as much or as many different types of movement skills as we can. And if we can do that, and we can do it in a fun way, then hopefully we hook those kids in, we keep them physically active, and we develop that lifelong physical fitness. Yeah, I mean, and again, if we look at some of the research about lifelong physical activity, we know that children who participate, and I'm using sport here. We know that children who participate in sport or any type of activity have a greater level of movement skill competence and are more likely to stay involved in physical activity. So the evidence is there. If you participate in sport or if you participate in physical activity, you are more likely to have good movement competence, good motor skill competence, good fundamental movement skill. And I use that term to represent all three. Now, we need to be careful. Just by playing sport doesn't necessarily mean you will become or develop really good movement competence. Because some sport, it could be, right, there's a ball, just go and play. Which is fine, because by playing, kids will learn, they will develop, they will experiment, they will experience different movements. But as I've said previously, we need to be there as coaches and teachers to make sure we ingrain good habits in young children, that they develop good movement skills, they become competent in those movement skills. And again, I refer back to this model. If we get it right at the bottom, when I'm talking about lifelong physical fitness, it's about a pathway. It's about progressively developing young children. If we get it right in schools and we get it right with the coaching and the teaching that we deliver, kids will progressively move through those stages. If we get it wrong and we don't teach them to be competent in movement and they don't become physically active, that is when they are going to develop negative consequences of not having movement skills. And that's going to be when they develop the cancers, the heart disease, the lung disease, the mental health. So there's good evidence out there that you can bring in to support the positives of young children developing fundamental movement skills. So again, it shouldn't be taken lightly, and I think that's what we do at the minute as PE teachers. That's what we do as sports coaches. We think, well, it's just about playing games. It's not just about playing games. It's teaching kids to be competent in movement. And if they're competent in movement, it can hook them into sport and physical activity for the rest of their lives, and hence give them good health. And I talk about, I think there is a fine line between being a really good teacher and being a really good coach and doing too much or too little. So if we don't do enough, we're going to have the incidences with the young child on the right hand side. The one who sits down is obese because they've had poor experiences. They've had the teacher that is too demanding, too aggressive, too overpowering. And those kids have bad experiences of PE in school and hence they don't engage. But you've also got those parents that maybe and those teachers that do a little bit too much and they push their kids too much. So they might have really good fundamental movement skills, but because they play too much and they're overplayed, they're going to develop negatively because they're going to have inhibited athleticism and they're going to burn out. They're going to develop overuse injuries. So there's a fine line. There's doing too little in terms of fundamental movement skills and there's doing too much in terms of movement skill development. So as teachers and coaches, it's having that balance. So it says, while sport participation provides a mechanism to increase physical activity levels in youth, we need to be careful that we're exposing young children to the right levels of physical activity. And we need to make sure we prepare kids. So if I'm a parent now and my young child is very talented at football, if I'm pushing them too quickly too soon and I'm pushing them up age groups to go and play because they're very skillful, they're very technically competent, am I making sure that in terms of their preparation, I talk about preparatory neuromuscular training, have they prepared their bodies, their muscles, their ligaments, their tendons? Have they prepared their body to physically cope with the demands of playing up a 1 year age group or a 2 year or a 3 year? And that's what we tend to do with kids. If we recognise they're talented, we will push them too quickly too soon and we will miss out on the essential fundamental movement preparation. And hence, that's where we get inhibited athleticism. That's where we get increased risk of injury. So that's what I mean by the ambiguity of teaching and coaching. That as a teacher and a coach, you have got an obligation to make sure all your children that you teach are competent by the time they leave primary school in the basic movements.